down or are you going up? Going up and to the right, up and to the right.
Up and to the right.
Go to the little tiny, where it looks like a little tiny.
Yep.
Oh, well, go into the right.
This will work. Okay.
See, you did the hokey pokey and you turned yourself around.
I don't know. I don't know what happened there. That was very strange.
I think we're set then. Let's get started. So good to see you all at the town hall. I think that we have a lot of familiar faces here already, and I'm sure we got more people rolling in. So welcome to all our regulars, and then we'll see a bunch more kind of as the night moves on. Just for a little bit of background, in case it's your first time, we're DK and Mishti, and we're from the Highlighter team. And we're building Highlighter as a place to gather to read and discuss great writing. Now, these town halls are a way to bring writers into the mix so we can dig deeper on their ideas with people who are interested in the books that they're writing. Tonight, we're springboarding our discussion off of Rob Chesnut's book, Intentional Integrity. And we've got a link we're posting in the chat, so you can order it on Amazon if you haven't yet. And yeah, check that out in the chat.
Yeah, and we're really thrilled for this book to be out. I think I told Jillian over email, this topic feels really more relevant with every single headline that we read, like every day, from Uber to Coinbase to the Google antitrust. I feel like
the administration
stops. Exactly, the administration. Talk about integrity there.
Lack thereof.
Exactly. So definitely, I think we'll have a really robust discussion, but just to encourage everyone, these town halls are really magical when people pitch in and really actively participate. So we'll kick it off, but please do chime in with ideas and questions. You guys can just type into chat and we'll welcome you up to chat with Rob live. And we are recording the session and streaming to YouTube. So we'll make a video so people can learn from the discussion, even if they couldn't come.
Now, we typically invite a community member who has a personal connection with our guests to help introduce the introductory story. And in this case, our community member introducing is Rob's partner, Jillian, who's a force of nature herself. She's managing partner of Structure.VC. And Jillian, we hope you'll chime in with your thoughts too. But before we do the intro, we have a question for everyone in chat just to kind of kick it off and get your juices flowing. So we want to ask you something relevant to the writing and the topic that Rob has written about. So the question is, what is your personal mission or one of your personal missions? And how much do you find that that is tied to your career or to your employer? So do you have a personal mission, and what is that? And is it tied to your career or your employer? Are they fully aligned, partially aligned, totally misaligned? We'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jillian to provide the introduction.
Everybody's thinking about this.
I know, right?
So it's very difficult to sort of capsulize Rob Chesnut, but for those of you who have not read the book, Rob has had a very interesting professional journey as well as a personal one, both part and parcel. He started out as a federal prosecutor in Virginia. He worked on the Rocket Docket, which is just a fast accelerated, one of the most accelerated courts. He prosecuted spies, which is always fascinating, such as Aldrich Ames, and ran around the world doing so. He's been in every nook and cranny of this world. It's fascinating. And he's been in every state in the United States, every state. It's hard. That's difficult. I realize that without an RV, I'm thinking. He then went to eBay. One person came up to me a long time ago and said, aren't you dating Rob Chesnut? Isn't he the architect of trust and safety? And I thought, okay, yes, absolutely. So he built that at eBay. He was the head of trust and safety, and then GC North America, went to Chegg and took that company public because education is really important to Rob. And then went over to Airbnb as general counsel and really created one of the main pillars, which is integrity at Airbnb. Sort of shifted out of GC and became the chief ethics officer, which is really who Rob is. I mean, that's who Rob is. It's not what he does. That's how he lives his life. It is all about the integrity. There is no other choice than doing the right thing. I'm aspirational on that journey. Rob does it, and I try to do my best. But what I think is most interesting, there are a lot of things about Rob, his commitment to the environment. He really, really wants to be a farmer. His commitment to really everybody reaching their potential, being the best they can be. And I've realized that about Rob. I think where you'll never hear him speak about Harvard Law School, you only hear him speak about UVA. He sort of drinks this Kool-Aid. It's, he has a main line of UVA. And I always thought it was because of the basketball. I've never been surrounded by more Wahoos dating Rob, but it's really because of the code of conduct of UVA. And that is really where he is. That is his North Star. So when he wanted to write this book, it made perfect sense because it's who he is, not just what he does. And so he's actually my North Star. And for full transparency, Rob and I got married. So, yes, just the two of us, and my teddy bear was the ring bearer, and an 80-year-old female judge, and there we go. But I'm really honored to introduce Rob. He's one of a kind. He's truly one of a kind. He is my North Star. So I'm just thrilled that you're all going to be now handed over to Rob, and I'll be eagerly waiting and listening, sweetheart.
Thanks, honey. It's wonderful to have a wife who honestly feels that way about you. And my wife is, she is my better half. So it would take me longer to introduce her, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. That was such a nice intro. Thanks for sharing that story. And we're excited to have Rob share his time with us. So, I think kind of dovetailing on that, you talk about sort of how integrity is really kind of who he is. And so, I'm interested to hear from Rob. When I think about integrity in my life, it's very clear to me that, my role model is my father. It's like, that was kind of his style. He imbued that. And I wonder, I'm sure that because integrity is such an important part of who you are, it must come from somewhere probably deep in your past. It's not just because you had a job in trust and safety somewhere that you got in this. So I'm interested to hear sort of what sort of the rooting piece. Is there a certain rooting experience or person in your life who kind of guided you down that path?
That's an easy one. That's my mom. My mother was really an incredible human being who, I'll tell you a story that I remember about my mom. I share this in the book. I remember when I was young, my mom and I were walking outside of a grocery store, and we were in the parking lot. And my mom looked down at her hand with the money she had in her hand. And she looked at me and said, "We've got to go back in." So we dutifully marched back in. And I remember she's talking to the cashier. And I remember how shocked the cashier was and how incredibly grateful the cashier was. And I didn't know what was going on. And I was like, afterwards, like, "Mom, what was going on?" And my mom explained that the woman had given her too much change. And and I asked my mom about that, and she said, "Well, the money doesn't belong to us, so we had to go back in and return it." And that made a real impression on me for some reason at a young age. And I remember, Jillian and I were we bought bikes recently, and every time this sort of thing happens, my mom comes back to me. And when we bought the bikes, somehow they had put in an extra bike lock by accident. That we hadn't paid for. These were expensive bike locks. And I remember looking at Jillian, and it's like, "I'm going to hop on the bike, honey, and ride back over to the bike store." And it's just the way you do things. And same shocked look on the clerk's face when I came back to say, "This belongs to you guys." But that's important. I think, you do that sort of thing, just like my mom passed it to me. I think every time you do something like this, you pass along a little integrity to the person that experiences it with you. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. And so I think these kinds of, personal integrity stories that, may have been formative are oftentimes easy to understand, even if they're hard to execute. And then when you sort of take integrity into these, to these complex societal, political, technology environments, there's it's probably a lot of situations where it's not as clear or sort of has longer term and shorter term impacts. And so how do you think that a company, you've been involved with a bunch of different companies who've tried to express integrity in different ways. How do you think that a company finds its rooting or kind of North Star?
Well, sometimes they're complicated. Sometimes the integrity issues, and sometimes they're really not that complicated, but in an effort to try to come up with a rationalization for an action that a company really wants to take, they can make it seem complicated. I think if you're running a company, you got to go to your North Star when you're looking at the more complex ethical issues. And by that, I mean, why do you exist? What's your purpose? Profit is not purpose. I think all companies need to have some reason that what they're doing is important to the world. And that's something that's got to be blown out through the entire organization. Employees have to understand it. And by the way, your customers should do it. Your customers should get it. Your customers should be inspired by it. And I think, based on what you stand for as a company, helps you get through the challenges. And I'll give you an example. When I was at Airbnb, I'd been there for about a month, and the whole Airbnb wild black blew up. And so this was, Airbnb went through a period of time where a number of users, Airbnb guests, started sharing experiences online that they were being discriminated against, that they were being turned down by hosts due to the color of their skin, right? And a couple of lawsuits started coming in. Government regulators started calling, right? And so, being the good general counsel, I go off and do my legal research. So I go do the research on what is the liability of a platform like Airbnb when certain people on the platform may, contrary to your own instructions, engage in this sort of bad behavior. Does the Federal Fair Housing Act even protect short-term rentals? And I go through all this, and when I'm done, I go to meet with Brian Chesky, the founder. First big meeting with Brian, been there a month, right? And I start going through the law with him. And Brian says, hold on, stop. I don't care. I'm like, whoa, what do you mean you don't care? Brian said, Rob, if this sort of thing is going on our platform, we are failing as a company. Our mission is to promote belonging in the world. Belonging is this idea that you want human beings from different countries, different areas of the country, different walks of life to meet and interact as human beings away from computers, right? In a real human experience through immersive travel. And like Brian's like, look, this is why we exist. And if people are engaging in this sort of behavior, we're failing. And he said, I don't care what the law is, we're fixing it. Doesn't matter what it costs. This is fundamental to our mission. So things like that, if you understand why you exist, why your company it does what it does, why you come to work every day, sometimes it can take the complicated and make it a lot clearer. And that was, I think, a real moment of clarity for me when Brian put it that way.
I think that's really interesting because that connects to a discussion going on a lot these days about whether a lot of these big tech companies are just platforms or really publishers, and they should take ownership of the kinds of things that are being shared on Twitter, Facebook, whatever it is. So how do you think organizations should think about that? Like, to what extent are they responsible for the content being disseminated? And what would you say about some of the debates going on right now?
Yeah, I think there's a legal question, and that is, should a company be legally held responsible? And then I think there's the integrity question. The second part of it to me is pretty simple. You've got to take ownership. You know what? It's your frame is up there. Whatever the item is up there, it's on your website. Your frame is around it. Your logo is up on the top. You're profiting from that item being on your site, right? Through the advertising views. Like it or not, what is on your site becomes your brand, right? Facebook right now has gone through so much because it was unwilling to deal with fake information, false information, hate speech. And, you know, their employees wanted them to take more ownership. Their employees weren't proud of it. Customers started boycotting. I think whether you like it or not, what's on your site becomes you. And this is something we started dealing with in the earliest days of eBay. I remember one day we were grappling with these sorts of things at eBay. I got a call from the customer support team. They would call me whenever you'd get an item on the site and you weren't sure what to do with it. They'd call me. So I got the call one day, and it was a sacramental wafer. Someone had gone to the Vatican and gotten communion with the Pope. And, you know, you're supposed to, you know, you take the sip of the wine and you take the wafer. They took the wafer from the Pope. Instead of putting it in their mouth and eating it, they put it in their pocket. And then they went off and put it on eBay, right? And look, you know, my initial reaction is, oh, it's a wafer. The church gave it away. If somebody wants to sell it, let them sell it. Who cares? But I got a lesson pretty quickly in Catholicism. The Catholic Church immediately instituted a boycott against eBay. And their message was, we were selling the body of Christ. We were selling the body of Christ. It was that clear to them. And what became really clear to me was, what sort of a site does eBay want to be? For example, what about World War II memorabilia, Nazi memorabilia? You want to sell that? And so we had to make a decision about whether we were going to just sell what was legal, or whether we were going to start making some judgments about what kind of a site we wanted to be. And look, this happens over and over again with all platforms. Airbnb. We got word one day that before Charlottesville, the white supremacy meetings, demonstrations in Charlottesville, we got word that some of the white supremacists were staying in Airbnbs and planning to meet in Airbnbs before going out to do their demonstrations. And I think maybe in part because of our mission, and in part because of what I had been through at eBay, it was not a hard decision for us. We said, you know something, they're going to have to stay somewhere else. We are not going to be a haven for white supremacists in these sorts of demonstrations. So we went online, we looked for names of individuals who were leading the movement. We looked for reservations and we canceled reservations. But we said, we're not going there because we think that sort of stuff becomes your website, your company. And we don't want to be that kind of company.
So, Rob, one of the things that you've brought up a number of times is that companies that do have values are the ones that actually outperform other companies. There's not just doing the right thing. There's data that shows this. And I think that's a really salient point.
A lot of people say, well, Rob, business is business. It's dog eat dog world out there, and we're here to make money. We're not here to make value judgments. But you make a great point. There's so many studies. Accenture's done a number of these, for example. And what they've learned is that companies that have a purpose, an articulated purpose, that act with integrity, actually outperform the market, and they outperform their competitors. So the interesting thing is, it's not a trade-off. You don't have to make a decision between doing the right thing and maximizing financial value. I actually think if you are not acting with integrity, you are not maximizing your potential as a company.
So there's a question from Balaji, and I want to invite him up in case he's still has curiosity around this, because it's asking about trying to respond to somebody who does make the profit maximization argument. And I wonder if there's more color that he would add on that, given what you're saying. But I could imagine that there's a certain type of company, and maybe we wouldn't think of it as the kind of company that we would want to, that we would attribute an integrity kind of value to. But there's companies out there that primary business is, drilling for oil, for example, right? Like, how do you sort of think about profit maximization versus integrity if you're kind of in the fossil fuel industry, for example?
Yeah. So there are certain businesses that seem almost by their nature to have such deep integrity problems. I mean, look if you're in the cigarette business, right? What do you do in those sorts of circumstances? And those are not businesses that I would choose to go into personally, nor are they businesses that I'd want to work in. I think though, if you have to understand that the world is dependent on oil right now, like it or not. A company that is in the oil business is providing the necessary engine for the world to run. Now, I would argue that a company in that space should be investing heavily in alternatives that are good for the world, and almost like a horse to water, pulling the world toward those alternatives, that it should recognize that it has an obligation to reform its own business practices, right? That would be the way I would look at it. I think companies that understand their broader obligation to the world should operate always with an eye toward how can we evolve our business in a direction that is what the world needs. Because in my mind, if you don't do it, the world is going to either punish you or force you there. And the faster you can get there ahead of being forced, I think the more long-term success you're going to have.
Right. So that makes me think about the time frame around which a company is structured to kind of exist or optimize or serve its mission. Because, if a company has, a goal that can only be achieved in 100-year period, basically, most of the people who would be working on it are not even going to get to see the ultimate solution. I don't know if we have examples of that. And then there's a lot of companies that are more short-term focused. So, wouldn't any company have kind of some mix of time frame over which it hopes to achieve something? And how do you think about sort of the time frame around which a mission or a goal kind of should be established or focused?
Yeah, again, it's interesting. To how fast is the world going to force you there?
Right.
So, one thing you've got to look at is you may not have a full control over this. The world may push you there from a regulatory perspective, or your customers may simply leave you. So there are going to be pressures for you to move quickly. You also have financial stakeholders. Realistically, you may not be able to just drop everything you're doing and immediately 100% of your effort toward that newness, because you may need the money from the old in order to finance the new. So I think those are all factors that you've got to look at. My push here would be recognize that the world is probably going to be pushing you there. And it's always a lot better if you can lead and do it voluntarily because it's the right thing to do, instead of even a perception that you're being forced. I mean, look, take Facebook. Facebook has been taken a lot of grief for being slow to act and control its platform. Now it's starting to do it, but it's not really even getting the credit for it, because everybody knows that it's doing it because of the boycotts and because of all the government push and regulation. I would look at another company, like maybe a Twitter, that got ahead of it a little bit faster. And I think they've benefited, their brand has benefited, because it doesn't look like they're doing it because they have to do it. They're doing it because they recognize this broader obligation.
I want to just ask Balaji if he has any follow-ups from that, based on your perspective too.
Yeah. Hi, Rob. I wanted to ask about where exactly the how to balance being a company and doing good. I mean, a lot of the argument behind companies not attempting to do good is because they quote unquote aren't incentivized to do that. I live in New York, and a few years ago, Kickstarter, which is based here, became a public benefit corporation. Do you think more companies should do that? Yeah, how do you feel about that?
I think that the world is pushing all companies to have an element of public benefit. I think the reason this whole category of public benefit companies was set up, it was set up under the old way of thinking about companies. The old way of thinking about companies is companies exist to promote shareholder value, and that's it. And I think we were all really unsatisfied with that world, because companies that are only existing to bump their stock price up cut so many ethical corners and do things that are bad for the world. So that's why you have this idea of a public benefit company, because at that point when that category was created, that was actually a novel concept. Oh, wait a minute, a company that actually might do good for the world. I think where the world is moving is companies that can do both, that have multiple stakeholders. And one of the stakeholders is the public. I like Airbnb explicitly acknowledges that one of its 5 stakeholders is the world. So Airbnb has an obligation, it believes, to its investors, but also to its guests, its hosts, its employees, and all the communities around the world where it does business. So in a sense, it's a public benefit company as well. And I think what we're going to see is just an evolution of all companies to begin to accept and even embrace an element of public benefit in its model.
Actually, we have a question from Max. Max, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks for being with us tonight. Sometimes it's easier to lobby politicians, especially in America, compared to changing a business strategy or business model, a whole business model. So can you talk about the ethics of lobbying for a competitive advantage? Yeah, an Airbnb, Chegg, whatever your past experience.
We lobbied at Airbnb, and look, lobbying like anything else has a good side and it can have an evil side. There are a lot of politicians that unfortunately I think are very responsive to money. They're responsive to political pressure from organizations. And if you aren't engaged in the political process, you're going to lose, even if what you're trying to do is actually good. I wish I could tell you that I had such confidence in the political system that the political system would magically come to the right answer and you didn't need to be involved in lobbying. I don't think that's the case. Now, the bad side of lobbying, of course, is you're engaged in poor practices and you're basically trying to pay money to a bunch of government officials to get away with it. And obviously, I think that's wrong. But a lot of times it depends on your perspective, which category you fall in. I think it's a necessary evil. I wish I had more confidence that government would get it right and really make an honest effort to try to figure out the best course for the public good, instead of trying to figure out what's going to help somebody get reelected.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I also wanted to ask you, Rob, if you could kind of talk us through like one of the ethical challenges that you personally have struggled with the most. And then a lot of these cases, if you step back, it seems kind of clear what the right thing to do is, and then maybe it's more a sense of how to operationalize it. But what's a situation where you struggled to figure something out, and how did you approach that? Because I know people on chat like EJ are saying that it'd be really helpful to sort of get like a play-by-play.
Yeah. I saw EJ's note there, and I'm telling EJ, I understand your skepticism, but I can tell you as the person that was there, the white supremacy issue for Charlottesville was actually really not that hard a decision. It had nothing whatsoever to do with any sense of liability. And it had nothing to do with a sense of which one is going to get us more money one day. I've been with founders that are only worried about the money. That's not Airbnb. Now, money, I'm not going to tell you that money doesn't matter. Of course it does. And investors are important stakeholders. But I'll tell you, sometimes, and I can tell you this is definitely true at Airbnb, you got a mission. And if you're really serious about your mission, that was an easy decision. You can't be involved with a hate organization. For Airbnb, quite easy, I think, to make the decision about discrimination. We talked a lot about the best way to attack discrimination on the platform, but the decision about whether to attack it or whether to try to take the hands off, we're only a platform, that was literally a 30-second discussion with Brian. End of story.
Do you think there are areas where, a technology company might be building and the answer to how to operate with integrity is actually easy to come by, but the technology to build to actually implement the goal of integrity is not yet possible? Do you think does that come up a lot, or do you think that that's more?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, particularly with big platforms.
Mhm.
I have folks that worked with me at eBay in the early days of fighting, illegal items on eBay.
Mhm.
We had no tools back then, and it was extremely challenging to find and identify counterfeits, pornography, and the like. I talk to those same people because those same people now are in high positions at Facebook and YouTube.
Mhm.
They're running trust and safety for those companies. The technology has gotten a lot better, but the problem's also gotten a lot harder. And there is technology that can help identify problematic items. But boy, look at YouTube. You've got to review, think of the vastness of video. And the idea of having to review video
Right.
and for hate speech and inaccuracies
Mhm.
and promoting violence. That's a challenge for technology. And I think as technology gets better, so do the people that are intentionally trying to evade that technology. But look, there's no
Mhm.
question, I think it's easier today than it was 10 years ago for platforms to control what's on their site. Easier. Still challenging? Absolutely.
Mhm. Cool. So I think we had some questions that we got some prep from ahead of time that I wanted to relay. There's this question recently, kind of around Coinbase, that I think has become a bit of a weather vane issue, kind of in the technology industry. And I think almost like a Rorschach blot test. People see in it what they want or their own position. And I wonder, I think that's just like such a real time. Kind of a tech ethics question to deal with. I wonder, when you look at that, is it, do you see kind of clarity with how to interpret that, or how do you think they're doing kind of as a mission-driven company, or kind of managing their integrity?
You know what? I saw the statement. I didn't like the way it was framed. It almost seemed to be framed as if we don't have time to worry about all of the externalities, the things going on in the world. We're here for work. We're here for business. And I think that's a simplistic view, because I think the two are ultimately very tied. When I look more closely at the CEO's comments, I see things like, we shouldn't be involved in these sort of external events, except to the extent that they are related to our mission. In which case I would agree. Look, I think like Airbnb, for example, had to be very involved in discrimination because it touched on their mission. Airbnb got involved in immigration issues because immigration and free travel across borders, very related to Airbnb. Should Airbnb be involved in gun control? I'm not so sure, because I don't know that it really is related to its mission. And it could arguably be a distraction and really not related to what the company's day-to-day business is. If that's what Coinbase is talking about, then I think that the point actually makes sense. If they're trying to say that, well, I would like to ask this question to the Coinbase CEO. Let's take the example of Cloudflare. Cloudflare came under fire last year because Cloudflare provides security services to websites. They protect you against hackers and against denial of service attacks and the like. So it came out that Cloudflare was providing services for a website called 8chan, which is one of the dark corners of the internet, where there's hate speech, promotion of violence, glorification of violence, a horrible website. And Cloudflare was called out for providing protective services to this site. And initially, Cloudflare CEO said, we're only a platform. We provide services to anyone across the internet. We don't get involved in the nature of the sites. And then everybody started saying, oh, really? Really? You think it's okay to provide those sorts of services to a site like 8chan and make money from it? We don't think so. And then a number of people started calling for boycotts of Cloudflare. Well, Cloudflare quickly reconsidered and then decided that they would not support 8chan or other hate sites. So I think that was a good choice. I think Cloudflare needed to stand for something beyond simply, we'll take money from anybody. Now, I don't know how the Coinbase CEO would feel about that. And it would be interesting to ask them. But I think that if you're providing security services to websites, you ought to have a baseline of what you are protecting. And you ought to take a stand that you're not going to provide your services to sites that are promoting hate and violence.
Do you think you end up, if you were to make such decisions, I guess in the case of 8chan, I think it's pretty easy for somebody who, would, I don't know, maybe a reasonable person would think that it's easy to say that you don't want to provide services for 8chan, but then, presumably there's somewhere that hits kind of a gray area, right? Something that's on the border. It's not exactly hate speech, but it doesn't quite sit right. How do you sort of, how do you make the gray area calls? How do you kind of really get to the details there?
That was something we did a lot of thinking about at eBay. Pierre Omidyar, the founder of eBay, I think his initial reaction was, if it's legal, we should sell it. He was very libertarian in his philosophies. And we had to evolve that and talk about it. And one of the arguments against getting involved was, well, it's a slippery slope. Who are we? What about, won't there always be a difficult item? And I think the answer is, it is challenging. There are going to be items on the edge, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. Compared to difficult decisions you make in other areas of the business, it actually isn't that hard. We created a gray items group, and we made sure it was diverse, it was global, so we could get different perspectives. You don't want one person just sitting back and making those decisions, right? So we created a diverse team. We held regular meetings. We brought the items to the table. Everybody commented on it, and we made our calls. And I think, sometimes the decisions were hard, but just because they're hard doesn't mean you shouldn't try to make them.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I'm going to tag up EJ. I see that she has a question on designing integrity within the org, which I think dovetails nicely off of this topic.
Yeah, thanks, David. And Rob, apologies if my previous comments are coming off a little bit sharp and skepticism. It's I genuinely want to better understand what's the real scoop, and I trust that you are telling us what happened. My curiosity is, okay, so tell me the backstory of the backstory, because I genuinely want to know, because I want to be equipped in case that ever happens in an organization I'm involved with, to be able to navigate that skillfully and with integrity. So I'm asking these questions so that I can learn.
No offense. This is all, I love it actually, because I know a lot of companies would only be motivated by money. But look, I'll give you the, even more specifics about the Charlottesville and the white supremacy. One thing I think we did pretty well was we talked about integrity across the company. And we encouraged an environment where people are encouraged to speak up. If they see something, it's not a bad thing to raise your hand at Airbnb. And this was not something that was, frankly, on my radar screen, but someone in customer support noticed it. I think it had actually been posted somewhere on the internet that people who were leading the Charlottesville rally were staying in Airbnbs. And a customer support rep noticed it, sent it to their supervisor, who then sent it on to me and quickly went to other members of the executive team. And it was unanimous. I mean, there was not a big discussion about it. We actually thought it was pretty easy, but I think it was enabled by the fact that we had a speak up environment where it was okay for somebody to ask the question, hey, what do you think about this? There are white supremacists staying in our listings. That kind of troubles me. What should we do about it? And I think at some companies, speaking up isn't okay. People are afraid to do it. And therefore leaders wouldn't have even had the opportunity to address it.
Super, super interesting. That's exactly what I wanted. I wanted to understand how that trickled up. And for me to hear that it actually came pretty much like at the bottom, right? Like it got crowdsourced from your customer success people. So my actual question that I wanted to ask, if I may still ask it, is given your various experience and kind of just lived experience in really trying to, on the spot, like design for integrity in these organizations, even if that wasn't like part of your job title, but you ended up in these positions where you were really pushing hard to make sure your company and organization landed on the right side of history. What broad themes or lessons come up for you if you could advise other leaders who might go through something similar in their future to better skillfully like navigate that so they learn from your experience?
Well, I think all leaders are going to experience it. I think it is part of leadership to get these issues. And I think a few things. One, as a leader, you have to accept the fact that you are, I call it the thermostat for integrity, not the thermometer. A thermometer takes the temperature of a room. A thermostat sets it. Everybody looks to the leader to set the thermostat on integrity. So if you're the kind of leader that stomps around the office saying things like, we've got to hit this number no matter what, or I don't care how you get this done, just do it. That sets, I think, the thermostat over to the far side of low integrity, because it's basically sending the message, get it done. And if you've got to cut ethical corners, cut them. Let's take another example. Ben Horowitz told me this, and I actually heard a similar story about Jeff Bezos from somebody at Amazon. Ben Horowitz, when he was a CEO, he would actually every quarter, it was his practice to sit physically next to his CFO with the numbers and look at the CFO in the eye every quarter and say, is there anything in these numbers that makes you uncomfortable in any way? Anything you were pressured to do, anything that is not according to accounting standards, anything that's misleading? And Ben would say, we might miss a number and our stock price might go down, but we're not going to jail. And by having that kind of an honest, direct conversation about a commitment to do the right thing no matter what, I think leaders set the thermostat on the other end. So the number one thing for me would be everybody's watching you as a leader. Everybody watches everything you say and do. You are the thermostat. And I think you have to embrace it. You can't ignore integrity. It's part of your job description. And you have to own having a direct conversation with people about it. And if you're willing to do that as a leader with the people you interact with, that sets the temperature in the environment where the whole company is going to operate. And you are more likely to have a company that will operate as a whole with integrity.
I want to tag up Nadia. She has a really interesting question about actually when you should push back on some of these roles. Do you want to ask Nadia?
Yeah, this is so like exciting and interesting. So thank you, Rob. And I'm curious, like something that I've been thinking about, particularly if there's like policies or practices that could harm certain groups over others, like how do you think about like when you should sort of like follow the system and rules and like when you should push back, and like how do you make sure that you're acting out of integrity rather than self-interest? Because I think something in some of the pieces you wrote that struck me was you might not be able to like tell for yourself, like, is this truly like acting out of integrity, or is it like my self-interest aligns with what I think is integrity? And like, you know, how do you sort of judge that?
Well, we all define integrity a little differently, because I think, you know, lying, cheating, and stealing is easy, but some of this stuff's gray. And I think each of us has a unique view of it because it's informed by our own life experience, our own beliefs, our own what our parents may have taught us, what church we may have gone to. And so what I encourage people to do is don't agonize over it alone. What you want is at a company is you want an environment where someone's comfortable raising their hand and just asking the question. And if they're not satisfied, maybe asking it to someone else again. Because a good company should welcome that conversation. It should realize that the big problems, the big fails, the Enrons, the Boeings happened because nobody raised their hand and said, hey, wait a minute, what are we doing here? And people that do that ought to be treasured and lauded as courageous in a company instead of looked down upon. And so I think it's on companies to create cultures of welcoming that sort of behavior, making it feel comfortable. And I can give you a quick example. This is a small example of how you create that kind of culture. And it started with me doing something stupid. All right. So we had an open desking at Airbnb. So I'm in a room with a lot of other people, and I'm standing at my desk one day, and someone comes up to me and introduces themselves, and they're a mid-level manager in IT. So I'm like, great, wonderful to meet you. He then looks at me and says, Rob, I couldn't help but notice when you left your desk a little while ago, you didn't shut down your computer screen. You left your screen open. I'm like, oh, I'm thinking to myself, oh no, right? And I think I had the natural human reaction, which is defensiveness. Oh, come on. I just went to the restroom. I was gone for less than 5 minutes. There's nothing sensitive on my screen. We're in a secure building. Everybody's got badges. Come on. But fortunately, I didn't say that. I just said that to myself. And luckily, another voice came to me in that moment. And the other voice said to me, how much courage did it take for a mid-level manager to come walking up to an executive team member and call them out for doing something wrong? And how great is it that this person just did this? And fortunately, that voice won. And so I looked at him and I said, you are absolutely right. And particularly somebody at my position, I ought to be setting the best example in the company. And I really didn't. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you doing that, because I need to do better. And then he showed me a neat little trick on my laptop where I could hit one button and lock really easily. So it was easy. And then after he left, I started thinking, this is a bigger opportunity. So the next large group meeting we had at Airbnb, I stood up in front of hundreds of people and I told the story. And I asked him to stand up, and I gave him an award. We had these little awards at Airbnb. They were these Yeti water bottles. We called them Integrity Yetis. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Yeti water bottles. They're great. Yeah. They're metal. They're really nice. This is one I had done for the book, but we had them with the Airbnb logo and the Airbnb slogan for ethics called Integrity Belongs Here. And I gave him an Integrity Yeti in front of hundreds of people. And everybody went wild and gave him applause. He wrote me an email a year and a half later. He said that was his proudest moment in 6 years of working at Airbnb. So the cool thing about it was, not only did I send a message to him that it's okay to speak truth to power, but by sharing the story and giving him an award, I was telling hundreds of people in the company, hey, leaders actually think it's okay if you raise your hand and even challenge them. So I would say, as a leader, look for opportunities to reward people who speak truth to power. And that's how you create an environment where people can speak up. That's what you need.
That makes oh, sorry, Jillian, do you want to add something?
So Rob created this ethics committee, and he really sort of deputized this, deputized is the wrong word, knighted, these group of people that at first was somewhat reticent. And why don't you tell the story? Because see, what happened at Airbnb was he really mobilized integrity. He didn't just speak about it. And I think that's what we really see when we look at people who build integrity into the foundation of their companies. It's not just thrown up on a website. It's actually, it is actually an extension of who they are as people, not just as a company. And the ethics committee was part and parcel of this, as were your videos, Rob.
Yeah, well, the ethics committee came from this idea that legal shouldn't own ethics. HR shouldn't own ethics. Lawyers are scary. They are to people, right? And no one wants to go to HR. Nobody wants to go to legal. Nobody wants to be a whistleblower. So how do you create an environment where people are comfortable asking these questions? You don't want them to have to go to the hotline. You don't want them to have to do something they're uncomfortable. You want to make it easy. So what we did was we created this program of ethics advisors, and we picked people all across the company, except lawyers and HR people. We picked engineers, marketing folks, sales people, finance people. We gave them extra training on the code, and then we sent them back to their team after 2 days. And we told the team, here's a resource for you. Here's somebody on your team that you know. You got an ethics question? You can just ask them if you'd like, or you can use the hotline, whatever you want. And you know what we found? We got more inquiries through the ethics advisors than any other channel combined, because people are okay asking a work colleague. We got over 100 inquiries to ethics advisors just in Q1 of this year. It dwarfs the number for everything else. And so that's what you got to do. You've got to share power, share responsibility, make ethics something that everybody in the company feels like they've got ownership over, and make it easy and comfortable.
Rob, what would you advise people do when they're in junior positions and they're not in environments where they feel like they can speak truth to power? Or like, I know I've been in situations where people say that, but you really don't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And so how would you advise, in a situation where you can't just walk away from the company, acting in a more junior level?
That's a hard situation. If you aren't comfortable raising your hand and you see something unethical going on, I'll actually tell you, I can't go into details, but there's a company that I do work with that had a significant integrity issue, very embarrassing for the company. And after doing the full investigation, they had to fire a number of people on a team. And when the investigators were digging around, they found that one very, very junior person had left the team early on when all the bad activity started. So the investigators reached out to this junior person. You know what they found? The junior person saw what was going on, was so uncomfortable and distressed that they decided they'd rather have no job at all than to work in an environment like that. So they just quit. And we were so impressed with this person, this very junior person, who rather than get involved or go along or remain silent, decided they didn't want to do anything wrong, didn't want to do anything wrong. We decided, you know something? That team needs more people like that. We need somebody who is so committed to doing the right thing that they'd rather go off and lose their job than to be involved in it. We hired them back in, and they've been a rock star apparently ever since. So I think I would encourage you, if you can't speak up, and by the way, a good company should have a hotline where you at least can do it anonymously. If you really aren't comfortable speaking up, I think you're better off getting away than staying around trouble. And then in the long run, I think taking that sort of a stance will benefit you. But maybe that's easy to say because, I'm at a point in my life where I could financially do it.
Yeah. I was actually curious if Jillian also had a perspective on this. Like, I know you probably mentor a lot of founders, but you've also been in many workplace situations yourself. So I wanted to just open up space in case you want to pitch in too.
Yeah. I've always, so Robbie and I have talked a lot around sexual harassment too, where everybody seems to want, talk in quiet voices, or people don't even want to voice anything. And this can really undermine every aspect of progress of a company. And so there are ways to create this quiet spaces, or I've worked with the buddy system actually in the early stage companies, that find someone who you trust and that you have this agreement with, that you can share, and they have to be and they would not be your direct report. And that sort of it disseminates this power structure. And I think that that has often helped, especially with women. And so when a woman comes into a company, the early stage company, I really try to find them, and I ask the companies to structure a buddy system so that they come in with someone that will not protect them, but will listen to them and advise them, and they don't feel like they are being judged by them.
Yeah. A lot of it, I think, is on the company to set up processes.
Yes.
Where somebody doesn't have to be courageous, where you don't have to be Susan Fowler, right? You want systems where, I'll give you an example. I talked to Reid Hoffman, and Reid Hoffman, is now, a leading venture capitalist. And I asked him, I said, Reid, how do you deal with the potential of sexual harassment, where a young entrepreneur might come to someone in your firm, and someone in your firm might suggest that the investment would go through if there were sex involved. I'd say, look, in that kind of situation, Reid, this entrepreneur is not an employee of yours. They don't have access to a hotline. What can they do? And Reid was ready, because Reid had done a lot of thinking about this. Reid said, that they had publicly put out a hotline that goes to a third party. And so as an entrepreneur, you don't have to report it to the company. You report to the third party. The third party is empowered to investigate. And Reid's deal with the third party is they will come with the results of the investigation. And if the third party doesn't believe that Reid's firm has handled the results of the investigation appropriately, the third party is empowered to go public. So that holds their firm to the fire of a third party is going to look at this. They're going to have to justify what their response is. And if they can't do it satisfactorily, they're going to have to face the consequences. I think structures like that put less pressure on heroes. I hate the idea that someone has to be a hero.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. That dovetails into a question that Nadia had, where she was talking about how do you avoid becoming the token whistleblower. Did you have more color to ask around that, Nadia?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Jillian was talking about, particularly in terms of like gender in tech, is something where like you do have like the Susan Fowlers, like the Ellen Powers, and it's something where you have these like amazing women in tech, but like I didn't know their names at all until they sort of became token whistleblowers. And so like, how do you find, I guess, like the right balance of being able to sort of speak up, but then not getting known as like only this thing, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Isn't that awful? I mean, I have such admiration for Susan Fowler for what she did, right? I mean, I would want Susan Fowler to work with me in any company, because I want somebody that's got that courage to speak up. But I also know she must have gone through hell. And what she's gone through, what Ellen Powell's gone through. I wish for people that they had opportunities to raise their hand and help companies solve problems without having to go through that. And Jillian, you've talked to people. I mean, this is Jillian, by the way, has a hotline for women who are victims of sexual harassment, but feel like they have no place to go because of who the perpetrator is. And, it's horrific how many women have called Jillian on her private, the cell phone, for Jillian to help them and walk them through this. It's horrific what people have gone through. And Jillian, you can take it away.
I've had over 2,000 calls over years.
Wow.
And then I match the victims together if they want to be. I introduce them so that we can then call out the predator. And it can be sexual harassment to rape, guys. I hate to say that, and then I introduce them to sources, legal representation, and mental health experts. And I've done this for many, many years. And so people in the industry do know, and I get calls for Rob at 2:00 in the morning, at 12 o'clock, it doesn't matter. I'm 24/7. And this has been critical. And that's why I am a supporter of Callisto. And I've worked with them for a very long time. and then I have literally a ledger of all the predators and all the names and all the victims. I don't even trust to put it onto because I don't want it to be hacked. And so I help with this, and a lot of the VCs and a lot of the people that were outed we were in the background. We were in the background. I have no tolerance for this, zero tolerance. And by the way, some of the times I have called the VCs and said, what the hell have you done? And I know about this, and you're going down unless you step out of the picture. And so sometimes it's a person, even if you don't have a loud voice, if you know someone who does have a loud voice, and I think you figured out that I do have a very loud voice, and I don't have any fear at this point in my life. And I have been, harassed throughout my life. And so I really do know what this is about. And you need to find someone to advocate for you if you can't advocate for yourself. And then as you continue through life, you will also then be able to do that for others. I truly believe.
You pass it on.
You
When
pass
somebody's there for you, you pass it on. And I think Jillian was Callisto before there was Callisto. And by the way, there are other ones. There's another company I really like called Vault.
Yes.
VAULT. They're out of London, but they do the same sort of thing of matching, helping match perpetrators and help victims get together so that they can see that there's a common perpetrator.
Yeah.
And this stuff is critical, and because without some technology and without some people that are willing to give their time to be there for victims, the stuff just keeps continuing.
Yeah, well, that's great. I'm glad to hear that exists. I wasn't even familiar with Callisto before, so I'm curious. I'm curious.
There's the hotline number. And by the way, I'll add one more. Companies
Yeah.
can do stuff as well. As part of looking at this at Airbnb, I looked at the pattern of sexual harassment and saw that over and over again, these cases were pushed to mandatory arbitration and often settled out of the public eye with NDAs. And so, at Airbnb, I went back to the legal department and said, well, why are we pushing employee claims to mandatory arbitration? Why do we have to do it that way? So we decided we dropped mandatory arbitration as a requirement for employees. We let employees decide if they want to go to court or not. And then we announced a policy that we will no longer use NDAs. Airbnb, any claim involving an employee, Airbnb will not use any NDA. The employee, as part of any settlement, will be allowed to speak their mind about what happened. Because I think being complicit in hiding is worse than the underlying problem. And we won't be a part of it.
Yep. Great. Well, I'm happy to hear that there's a lot of new solutions and there's structural systemic things that are kind of getting built to help organizations deal with integrity. It sounds like there's a lot in this particular case, but there's probably kind of other systems and technologies and networks of people that can help kind of create more integrity within organizations and kind of create the right incentive alignment to help organizations kind of carry on that mission. So I know we're sort of past the hours, and so I do want to get towards wrapping things up. But I do have that final question for you, Rob, which I don't know. I forget if we prepped you on this or not. So I might be catching you.
You may be catching me by surprise.
I'll catch you by surprise, but that's okay. It'll be. It's always a fun one. So before we actually ask you kind of our final closing question, I just wanted to first thank you, Jonas, and thank everybody for all the great questions at the town hall. It really means a lot to us to be able to get all these great minds and thinking together. That helps us learn together and ask questions. And I feel like it's just all being in a room together really helps, kind of creates a lot of energy and helps us learn better. So thanks to you, Rob, for joining us, and for everybody else for attending and bringing your questions. You can all stay tuned for future town halls in our Discover page. We'll send the link in the chat right now, highlighter.com/discover, and definitely order Rob's book on Amazon, which we'll send that link in Discover or in the chat as well. Coming up this Thursday, we have a lunchtime session of Highlighter Live where we're going to have James Williams talk about the attention economy and additional topics around tech ethics. So a little bit of a tech ethics week here on Highlighter Live. And then next week, we've got Scott Belsky talking about his book, The Messy Middle. And so with those announcements, then we'll come to our concluding question. So we've spent the evening here kind of asking you some of our questions for you. Now we want to turn the tables and give you a chance to ask us a question. And by us, it could be the people in this room or the world more broadly. But what are the topics that are top of mind for you these days? This could be, serious, it could be flippant, it could be, short-term or long-term philosophical.
Sure. Like everybody, the election is top of mind for me. And I do worry about our country and watching closely and hoping for good results and ones that I hope show respect for our election system. So that top of mind, I think, for all of us really is our democracy and what the next few weeks are going to hold for us. So I'm hoping good thoughts there. Although, beyond that, I also worry about our environment and spend a lot of spare time reading about climate change and what we can all do to be involved in change the course of what's happening to our environment. So those are the things that I do a lot of thinking about, in addition, obviously, to integrity.
Yeah, great. Well, I think those are also kind of augmenting kind of integrity and kind of moving the world forward. So I think those are great topics to also be thinking about. We really appreciate those thoughts. So thanks again, Rob, for joining us, and thanks everyone for attending and for all of your great questions. We'll see you next time.
I appreciate it. Really enjoyed it. Thanks
Jillian. Bye-bye.